Thank you very much. You'll see you had to read Hebrews, the whole of chapter 3. Whole 10 minutes. Wasn't long, was it? Hey, heading about it was Jesus greater than Moses. And I really want to come down to almost the closing part of Hebrews chapter 3. And you'll notice that if you read the last few things, that there was a concern that God had. And the concern that he had wasn't about laws. You know, we always tend to think that God somehow is like this tyrant just waiting for you to step across his boundaries or to break his laws. And the moment you do that, he's going to retaliate. We get this distinct impression that that's the kind of God that we're serving. But yet God, if you read in Hebrews chapter 3, is not concerned. Now it's interesting, you have the comparison between Moses and Jesus. Now Moses was the one who on the Mount of Sinai was invited up into God's presence, and God took the time to actually take his finger, push it into granite, write down his particular requirements, give them to to Moses, and Moses stepped down. And Moses is always seen as the person of law. And many times Christians would say to me, I'm so glad I'm not living in the time of the Old Testament, because, you know, if you stepped out of line there, in actual fact, there was a man who one day was helping with an Ark of the Covenant. It was being taken along on this ox wagon, and this ox wagon somehow went through a bump or a hole, and the ox started to slide as if it was going to fall off, and he reached out to take hold of the ox so that it wouldn't fall off, and he was struck with lightning by God. Oh, wow. I mean, if that was the kind of way in which God reacted there, if you stepped out of line, I think I would be a piece of charcoal by now. Because, man, I break the rules all the time. And it's not that I look upon God's law as something that's bad. I recognize, as his word teaches me, that his law, in actual fact, if we can really do it and keep it, it's an act of love. Hard to understand. How can law be a reflection of love? And yet it does. Teaches that very principle. If we truthfully could keep the 10 Commandments, we would be lovers of God and lovers of one another. But we think that the sheer letter of the law is what is important, but it's not the letter of the law that is really important. It's the spirit of the letter of the law. And here we find in Hebrews, and there's a reason why I'm bringing this out right in the introduction. I need to get something clear. The problem that God sees here and throughout, from the time of Adam, even before sin came into the world. Listen to this. Adam and Eve had not yet broken a law, and yet God had a warning. And the warning wasn't about breaking the law. The warning was simply this: do you believe God? Did you hear that? Now, what did God say to Adam and Eve? The day you eat of this tree, you will surely die. Do you believe that? By reaching out, taking it, and eating it, they didn't break a rule. They broke the understanding that they did not believe God. They actually believed the devil. Because the devil said, you will not surely die. So their means of their actions revealed who they believed. If they believed God, they wouldn't have eaten the tree. But their disbelief of God and their belief of the devil got them to do what he did. And actions or works, if I could put it that way, are just a revelation of your belief. Do you believe God? Now we know that God wrote the 10 Commandments with his finger. We know that. We read that. And we have this very interesting thing that comes out saying that Moses, in actual fact, it was the one that gave it. Do you believe it came from God, first of all? You know, now there's a lot of people say, no, the 10 Commandments was for the Jews. But then I find this interesting. One of the commandments, which was an action towards one another, is don't kill one another. Thou shalt not murder. We find right in the beginning, yes?
Just quickly going back to that thing where the belief, Adam and Eve, believe God. It also says in the Bible that the
Of all of them. Now, I like what you're saying, because just think about what Garth has just said now, because sometimes he doesn't realize it, but he actually says some things that are very good. But Satan, as he said, was crafty. What was his intent? His main intent with creation is to get you to not believe God. That's his main intention. I'm going to show you all of this as we go on, because it has very important relevance to what's happening now. But we see here, and I want you just to pick up on this. Before Abraham was called Abraham, it was Abram. And Abram came out of the land of Ur, out of the land of Chaldeans. Now the word Chaldeans rings in your ear, and when you think about it, you think of another city called Babylon. It was the capital city of the Chaldeans. Now I want you to pick up on this, because I'm going to be talking more about this as we go on. Pat, good to see you. Missed you this morning at the other meeting, okay?
I was there.
Oh, I didn't see your t-shirt. What I wanted to say was that he's now a Poinsettia dweller. Okay, he's in there already. But what I want you to see is that we have this attempt by the devil to get people to disbelieve, and we have Babylon being like the city of disbelief. I'm changing it a little bit. You'll see as I bring it out. It's a city that does not propagate God, but propagates everything else but God. It's in opposition to God. So if God says don't kill, it says kill. If God says don't steal, it says steal. It's the opposite. It places itself. And I want you to pick up on this, that there are two main actors really that's going on. And we have to choose which part or which actor we fall under. That's really the whole thing. Here we see in Moses the story again. I said to you that the Ten Commandments reveal that thou shalt not kill. If that was only introduced at Mount Sinai, then how come we have the horrible story in the 4th chapter of Genesis? Right after the fall, we have the murder where Cain kills his brother Abel.
It's actually quite interesting that from Eve sinning, how sin multiplies. The next generation, it goes from just eating an apple or doing something wrong or unbelief to God to actually murdering.
To murdering. It's just, I want you to see, and you know, you've just said it again, Garth, that it's, he had his Kellogg's this morning. When you think of it, initially Adam and Eve were under the banner of God. They followed God, they believed God. But what happened when Eve chose and Adam pursued? They moved themselves from under the banner of God to under the banner of Lucifer. And he was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. Now, there's a reason why I'm doing this. The attempt of God now is to get mankind to move from under the banner of Lucifer back to under the banner of God. How does God do that? How does God get you to move from here, which you have been born into, but which Adam and Eve chose to be into, but you are now under it because of their fault? You are there. How does God get you from this position back into this position? How does he get you from Babylon out of Babylon? How does he get the promise in Revelation 18 where he says, come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins? How does he get that? How does he actually do that? Now, a lot of people will place emphasis on behavior. They will say, in order to move from this one, here you kill, here you don't kill. So stop killing. If you haven't got a problem with murder, let me explain something to you. I've sat down many times, and this is not a debate for today, but I've asked this question, and I still would like to see it answered properly. If the word says, thou shalt not kill, when we take up arms against another country and we kill them, is that excusable? Now, it's a very sensitive ground to stand on now, because it means that if I say that, then I'm asking you to behave in a certain way. It's like saying if you want to be a true American, you can't ride on the left-hand side of the road, you have to ride on the right-hand side of the road. So what I've done to you is I haven't changed you by heart, I've changed you by action. You're not traveling on the left anymore, I've got you to travel on the right. And if you don't travel on the right, I fine you.
Yeah, but
So
traveling on the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the road is a simple traffic law.
yes, but you've just said it. It's a law that in order to have almost peace, you have to keep.
But isn't it a parallel with a lawyer? There's no such thing as being a good lawyer and being a Christian.
He's saying something that's very true. A lawyer, in some sense, will get you to behave right, but doesn't make you a Christian. A lot of churches are behavioral orientated. They might as well be philosophers or followers of Pavlov. You know Pavlov? He had this experiment where he took dogs and he would feed them. But afterwards he would ring a bell, which would be a sign to them that they're going to be fed. And he would ring the bell and they would come and he would feed them. He would ring the bell and he would come and he would feed them. Finally, he decided to try an experiment. He just rang the bell without feeding them. And they started to salivate. They were expecting food. And all that happened is they became conditioned. And it seemed like their behavior was correct. But their behavior was programmed. Now, God can't force you to keep His commandments. Because the moment you are forced to keep it, you've just changed your outward clothing. You haven't changed what's going inside the heart. And that's where Christ was speaking, and He was saying that it's not what goes into your mouth that is harmful, it's what's coming out. And unless there's a change here, you can look like a Christian, but you're not one. And you know, the challenge as we come down in this part here is how do you differentiate between Christian who's truthfully Christian and Christian who isn't? Now let's come back to Hebrews chapter 3. Listen to what he says in verse 12. And I can build on this more, but listen to what he says. See to it, brothers. Now it's almost like saying, hey, listen, you fellows, remember this. Practice this. See to it, brothers, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. It doesn't say, see to brothers, that you keep the commandments of God. He's saying that nobody will come to you and get you to disbelieve God. That's exactly what Lucifer did with Adam and Eve. Listen how he goes further. But encourage one another daily as long as it is called today. That means I'm asking you to do something today in order to be a child of God. So that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. Now, what's he saying? Is it saying that if I'm stealing, I know that that's sin? No. Sin is not believing God. Doing what he tells me not to do is an act that I don't believe. But my first reason for doing it is because I don't believe him. Now, for example, in John 14, he has promised to come back. Do you believe that? Because if you believe that, your life will reveal that. You'll be living a lifestyle that is telling me something that you are awaiting the return of Christ. But if you don't believe that, you'll be going around your merry way. You'll be doing your own thing. So there's this very interesting, let's have a look a little bit further. We have come to share in Christ if we hold firmly till the end the confidence we had at first. Listen to what he's saying. He's saying the challenge of the devil is to get you to somewhere doubt God. But what he's asking us to do is to remain firm in your first decision, and that's to believe God. What does the word say? If you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus Christ is Lord, you have moved from death to life. No change. But what's the challenge? To carry on believing that. You'll see that the sad thing about this, the Bible teaches me that some who used to follow and believe God fall away. And they start doing things that reveal they don't believe God anymore. Do you still believe God? As it has just been said, today, if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts, as you did in the rebellion. Now, the most amazing thing he's going to see, and you're going to see we're going to get called this, He calls the people back to an experience that they had in the wilderness. Now, I want you to bear this in mind, because we are now going to move to what's happening here. This is a wilderness experience. And the purpose of the wilderness experience is to establish if you are still genuine and confirmed in your decision that Jesus Christ is Lord. And that what He requires is, His bidding is your request, your desire, I mean. Your actions will really reveal that you believe God. Now let me show you something. Let's just have a look at it. Verse 16. Who were they who had heard and believed rebelled? Sorry. Were they not all of those Moses led out of Egypt? Now this is an interesting. He's saying, if you look at Moses, the influence he had over the people was a change of lifestyle, obedience. It was like. And yet, if you look at those that Moses appealed to, how many of them made it out of the wilderness?
Two. Caleb and Joshua.
Only 2. And they were the only 2 who what? Believed God.
One of the spies, the 12 spies.
The sad thing about it all is that even with the law which was given in its magnificence, never got them to be saved. And even the attempt to keep it did not save them. They died in the wilderness. I mean, this is what he's saying. If you look, pardon?
Moses also taken up.
Now, Moses died. Also true, but he was resurrected. But anyway, let's not get sidetracked. Moses believed God.
No, he got out of the wilderness, didn't
Yes, he got out. Oh, is that what you mean? Yes, he got out of the wilderness.
he? So it's 3.
Yes, but he wasn't allowed into the promised land.
100%.
But he got out. But there is something that we need to see here. Moses was leading them out, holding on to the law. How many of them survived that? Now, it's not saying that the law is wrong. But if you're relying on the law to save you, you've got a problem. Because none of them were saved who followed the law. The law is powerless to save you. It's got no blood in it. You have to keep it to be saved. If you don't keep it, you're lost. It's as simple as that. Now listen what it says further. And with whom was He angry for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the desert? And to whom did God swear that they would never enter His rest, if not to those who what? Now we get this whole thing that is about law. Sin is a violation of the law, transgression of the law, and the end result of sin is death, and their bodies are lying there. And we have all of this. But we don't realize that the reason why they did not do what God told them is because they simply did not believe. Now I'm going to tell you something. Your greatest challenge in this time that we're living in is to believe God. And we're going to see things. Let's just finish off. He says there, so we see that they were not able to enter because of their what? Unbelief. Not because of breaking the commandments. The breaking of the commandments was an indication that they did not believe.
Just if we can back step one there.
Yes.
When the flood came,
Yes.
and obviously Moses and his family got into the ark and off they went. The rain came and everybody else was
God.
gone. Is it right to understand that everybody that was caught in that flood were non-believers?
Well, let me ask you this. What did a believer do?
Got on.
Got into the ark. What did an unbeliever do?
Scoffed at it.
Stayed outside the
So
ark.
effectively, at that point on earth, there was 6 believers.
8 believers.
8 believers. But up until...
But we also remember there were certain that died.
Yes, that's what I was going to
Okay, but let's not, I want you to understand something. God is trying to sort out something here. When you die and you have been a believer, you are sealed in salvation. But what about the living? How does God seal you? Remember, the whole thing is about sealing. How does He seal you to go into the promised land while you're alive?
If you don't believe in Him, you cannot be sealed.
That's the bottom line. And I'm going to show you that there's some very interesting things that are coming out here. I want you to notice, and go with me to Deuteronomy chapter 8. We've done this before.
Sorry, just one thing which I also elaborate on what Tony just said there now as well, and it's something that I tend to see on a daily basis, and it's not for me to judge, but I have a problem with people that believe, they give their life to Christ, they confess their sins, they do all that kind of stuff, and for 6 months or a year they're all on the straight and narrow, for want of a better word, and then they just start drifting off that path. Now, there's a lot of times where they tend to fall off and off they go, but now if they've done that here, has God sealed them there already?
Yeah, but remember what He's calling you. I mean, there's lots of verses I can use. It's not a matter of choosing it now. Can I use your marriage? No, use your marriage as an example. When you say I do at the pulpit, you have to fight for that I do right until you die. Because along the line, challenges come to you to break that allegiance.
No, I agree with you.
So, when you choose to be a Christian, you don't just walk in and everything falls honky-dory. The Bible says that you are to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And I want to say that to you, gentlemen, if you want your marriages to survive, you have to work it out with fear and trembling. It's not just going to survive. In actual fact, the odds are against you because 2 out of 3 end up with not surviving. That's quite scary when you come down to the Christian, that only 8, okay, those who were laid to rest were perhaps died, but only 8 of the living climbed into the ark. They believed God. You know what is so crazy? I'm going to say something that might sound crazy, but the animals believed God too. That's why they got into the ark.
Just a left-wing question here. Did God not plan for them to fail? Because it had not rained. It had not rained until the ark was complete.
Okay.
So how could the planet not have had rain, but things were still growing and all the rest?
Okay, but for you, the problem with the flood is not a problem, no, because you know about floods. You know about floods. So if I came to you and said there's a big worldwide flood coming, which is the world is saying at the moment, aren't they? Because of the polar caps melting and all that, the world is going to flood. There's going to be a total flood of the world. Don't you know that? Have you lost track with what's going on out there? The greenhouse theory and all of that.
I'm sure the southern burgers.
But the point I'm making is you believe that because you've seen it. Isn't that true? You've from a historical point. Now, it's true what you're saying. They've never seen it, but faith is sure of what you don't see.
No.
So let me explain this.
Did God not set them up for this?
No. Then has God set you up because He says He's coming back? Have you seen Him? Have you ever seen heaven? Have you been there?
No.
Okay, so then how come you believe it?
No. What I'm saying is, at some point it had to have started to rain. So why did God leave the planet without rain for so long?
No, there was rain, but not in the form that they understood it.
Precipitation.
Yes, but I don't want to get... That's a question. If I can sit down with you, I can show you that the form by which the world was watered was almost like the sprinkler systems that we have now. But rain falling from the sky, not true.
That's what I'm saying. This is something we need to look at. Because what I'm saying is, did God not have that plan and say, okay, He knows that this world is going to get to such a point that it's going to sin so much, and I need to take them all out.
But let me just say to you this: how long did Noah preach for?
120 days.
120 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that was enough evidence.
But it rained for 7 days as well before
Yes.
the water.
Yes, but no, it didn't. The rain only came 7 days after. But what I want to say this to you, you're actually helping me today. Adam and Eve had never experienced death.
Yes.
But they had to believe it. Because God said it. Now I'm saying to you that that's the problem. We don't believe unless we see. Now the problem with let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 8. I want to show you something. Remember that the purpose of the wilderness experience, look at what he says there in verse 3. Or let's start with verse 2. And he's asking people to remember something. He's asking people who were actually in the wilderness for 40 years to remember something. He says, and you, Tony, you got it. Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 2, sorry.
Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the desert these 40 years to humble you and to test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his command.
Now that's interesting. Whether or no what? What was in your heart. If you really believed him and as a result will keep his commandments. You see, commandment keeping can either just be an action from here, or it can be an action that you actually believe. Now, I want to move away from this. Let's go back to Revelation again, because I want to introduce you. Now, with this in mind, the only way I can bring this home to you is to refer to Revelation chapter 14, first of all. And I want you to see something. Now, on the wall here, I wrote that there was a period called the Dark Ages. Now, gentlemen, I have decided that I'm going to devote almost a whole chapter in my book just to the Dark Ages to show you one thing. And the objective of the Dark Ages was to show that what had happened in the Dark Ages is that people had moved away from the light. Now, what I mean by that is that up to that point of 538 AD, the Word of God was the standard of life. From 538 AD until 1798 AD, the Word of God was dressed in sackcloth. That means it was not counseled or used for counsel anymore. If you wanted to know what was happening, they would go to the philosophies and teachings of men. And as a result, instead of getting to know the light, which is the lamp of God, we moved away from the light, and it was known as the Dark Ages. And for 18 generations, what became the means of knowledge wasn't the Word of God, but science, technology. Now, we have an incredible thing happening while there was a moving away from the Word of God. We had an incredible enlightenment taking place. And what was that enlightenment? The revolution. What was the revolution? What revolution? This was not revived. This was not brought into existence. In actual fact, this was discarded of non-importance. In actual fact, if you belong to the general population of Christian believers at that time who was called Catholic, please don't make the mistake in saying Catholic Church. Not true. The church in general, the word Catholic means worldwide church. So every Christian believer in some sense was a part of the worldwide church. There wasn't a name given to them. They were known to be Catholic. Common believers. But their common ground was found in the Word. If somebody stood up and said, this is light, they had to prove it from the Word. But all of a sudden, from 538 AD on, there is this massive movement away from the Word. And, well, you just mentioned, but I wonder, what happens in the time of the Dark Ages that's so incredible? When did most of the discoveries start, or inventions start materializing?
After 1844.
Before. We start with Bell, which became the cell phone in its brilliance. It started off with a and then finally they learned how to transfer that and make sound go along wires, and then they started to make it go on the air and sound waves on the air, and we had technology. There was this incredible growth of technology. I mean, we invented the wheel, and we invented combustion, and we started with cars, and you see from the stages how that the cars just improved. And it's true. From this period here, it kind of was very, very dark. But if you look at where we are now, man, we're just waiting for somebody to transport us from one place to another. We don't need planes anymore. We're actually looking at how they're going to do it, because they can take sound and they can transfer sound. They can actually take images and transfer images. But if I take this doesn't appear on that other side. But imagine if I could break this down and transfer it and then put it together on the other side. They are planning to try and do that kind of thing. And then we will finally say, beam me up, Spocky. That is really the direction that they say is going to happen as a result of technology.
But that 3D printer it does exactly that.
Brilliant. So
you send that over the air and it will print it out there.
well, it's amazing.
As a thing.
But it takes it from the plans. But okay, carry on. But what you said there, Pat, that's correct, yes.
It's not Sparky, it's Scotty.
Oh, did I say? Well, I'll rather be Sparky, okay.
You'll be able to visit heaven for the weekend.
Yeah, you just be able to, you want to go and see your family in Australia.
No, he wants to go to heaven, check it out quickly.
Yeah, I mean, but he wants to go long distances, But the point that I'm making here is that we must not be amused or amazed at what's going to happen in technology. We have not seen the end of technology. I mean, God's word actually teaches me that the Tower of Babel, God said if we left man and they could all speak a common language, what they put their mind to, they will achieve. So don't be surprised. And if you're thinking that technology makes us more saved, what makes you saved is a knowledge of the light. Now the world, and this is where I want to come in. You have two cities. You have Babylon, and you have Jerusalem. Now let me put it this way. Now, you're just taking these two words, just these two words alone. You know, Daniel chapter 1 opens us up to a war. Revelation 12 introduces us to this war also. And remember, I keep telling you, there's a war going on. Not a war that you think about keeping commandments and who's right and who's wrong and technology. There's a war about believing. Now, some people believe in Muhammad, and there's a lot of followers. Some people believe in the gods of the Hindus, and there's a lot of followers. They even walk on coals to prove their faith. And then you get Christians who by rights are followers of Christ, not followers of laws. So we have something very interesting. If you look at these two words, in Daniel chapter 1, we are introduced to war. Now, the reason why I'm emphasizing this is that when we attempt to understand the fifth trumpet, you need to bear in mind that there are two parties. The ANC, there are two parties. God's party and what's not God's party. It's just simply that. Now, Babylon has its original rooting or foundation is found in the word Babel, which comes from the Tower of Babel. And what do we know about the Tower of Babel? That they were confused. Okay, confused about what? If you talk about technology, I mean, what amazes me is that people who are designing things. I was reading or following it's called a slingshot. It's a bloke who's invented something, how to take impure water, no matter where it is, and he's got a machine that if you pump it, it brings out crystal clear, drinkable, sustainable water. And it's amazing. But you know, he does not believe in God. In actual fact, he talks about how that we all came from water originally. And I'm thinking to myself, man, is he confused? You see, his technology or scientifically intelligent, in actual fact, his gods, if I could put it that way, was Archimedes. He was the one who found the displacement of water. Remember, we have the story where he climbs into a bath, and it was a full bath, and the water pours out, and in the end, he determines that the volume of water that was poured out is equal to the volume of his body. So he could determine how much he weighed or what his volume was by the amount of water that went out. And he brings up this incredible formula, but it's scientific. And I don't want to undermine at all science. Man, I'm a follower of it. I use it. But I believe that God created the heavens and earth in 6 days because His Word tells me that. And yet science says no ways. Now somewhere I have to place myself under, do I believe evolution or do I believe in creation? Now some people say, come on, you're living in the dark ages if you still believe that God created things. No, you're not living in the dark ages. In actual fact, you're enlightened. The Word actually teaches me that you move from darkness into light when you actually accept God. But the world doesn't see that. Do you believe that? Now I'm going to tell you something, gentlemen. To be a follower of God is to believe God. To believe in every word that comes out of His mouth. Every word. Now the temptations of Christ are very valuable in us, in helping us to understand what's going to happen, what has been happening, and what will be the major attempts of Lucifer to get you to disbelieve. Now remember, when he came to Jesus, what did he say to him? If you are. Now what did God just say to him? Not even 40 days prior to that. What did God say to him? You are my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. He said that from heaven. God said that to Jesus. And all of a sudden this beautiful being, this intelligent being, comes and says, if you are the Son of God, turn the stone into bread. And so the very act of turning the stone into bread would have not indicated that he was a son of God, but would have expressed that in order to prove that he was a son of God, he performs a miracle instead of believing God. Did you hear what I just said? He believed his own father that he was a son of God. He didn't have to perform the miracle to prove that. How many of you are relying on being healed? Or how many of you are relying on prosperity? Or how many of you are relying on some tangible thing to believe God?
I'd say just to elaborate, it was a question of identity. It was an attack on identity. And that's exactly what happens now today. The question is, whose child are you? Are you really a child of God? So, and you can only answer that if you answer the question, who is Jesus?
Yes, but
once you know who Jesus is, and you truly believe, it comes to a belief,
yes.
Not just know of him, but know him.
So I want us to understand that we're talking about the same thing, identity. But I want you to understand, at the moment I'm using Babylon and Jerusalem. Now we can. Now the word shalom, you know the word shalom? Shalom, what's it mean? Come on. When I say shalom, what am I saying to you? Peace. Okay, that's Hebrew for peace. Jerusalem, basically again, Salem is also similar to peace. And we have that people call Jerusalem the city of peace. Okay? Interesting thing about Babylon, not only is it known to be confusion, but if you start breaking down the different words and things like that, you actually come where this was known to be the gateway to the gods. Now I'm going to explain this as we go on. Yes?
No, from the tower.
From the tower again. Gateway to the gods. So we have, but Jerusalem, if you really look at Jerusalem, the most incredible thing, and the reason why I'm doing this is I want you to understand what's happening. Jeru actually comes from the same root word as the word Torah. Now, the Torah, basically, the word Torah in the Hebrew actually means teach or teachings. Okay. So we have the teachings of peace. Wow, that's kind of interesting. And then we have the word shalom, and the word shalom was actually another word that was used for Christ or for Jesus in actual fact. And then we find that something that's interesting is that we find that in Jerusalem, the person who's most important here is Shalom himself, the Prince of Peace. And then we find that there was a saying amongst the Jews prior to the coming of Christ, where they believed that if you went to Jerusalem, it was your intent to find the Prince of Peace and learn of his teachings. Listen to what I'm showing you here. That is what it means to be under Jerusalem. To be truthfully in Jerusalem means that you believe that God's Son is here and that he has a teaching. He was called a rabbi for a reason. But you also have a teaching here. This teaching is opposite to this teaching. Which one do you believe? Now, this one at this present moment, I want to tell you in all its glamour, the fact that we have cell phones and the fact that we can do internet and the fact that we can Google and the fact that we can transport ourselves quickly to places has not yet saved one man. You still die. You die with a great cell phone at your side.
Or answer the question that begs to be answered: who am I? How am I here? Where am I going? It doesn't matter how much technology you have, that technology cannot answer those questions. And this is the problem coming back to it. We have an identity crisis because people are confused. They're in Babylon. They don't know who they are, where they're going, and what purpose they have.
So let's go a little bit further on this. I want you to understand something, that science, Christianity is not at war with science. Not at all. In actual fact, we extend our hands out to it. I mean, you're doing something on, putting science up and you put it up into YouTube and there we go. I praise God for science.
He blessed us with that integrity.
He blessed us with that knowledge. But have we made the knowledge our God? Is commerce and trade going to save us one day? Man, remember I told you that God is going to challenge what we place our trust in for solutions in this world, only to find out that they will not be able to help you. So, let's finish off this one again. Go with me again to you have to fly. You're just doing that too regularly. Just remember that. Okay, Revelation. I want you to look at Revelation chapter 14. There's two things that I want you to think about, because next week I'm going to talk about the two Babylons. And yet they're the same. But I want you to notice, Revelation chapter 14 introduces me to verse 8, and it says, the second angel followed. But I want you to notice something about this angel. It's kind of quiet. If you read the first angel, it says, another angel, this is verse 6, flying in the mid-air and with the eternal gospel, to proclaim all those living on earth, every nation, tribe. And he said with a loud voice. But then all of a sudden, number 2 is like, Babylon is fallen, that great city who made all nations drink of the wine of his fornication. It's like, where's its loudness? But it says something. I want you to notice it says, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. This great city, which made all nations drink of the wine of a fornication. Now, it's just made one statement. This city has confused people to such an extent, because they've been drinking from it, to such an extent that they don't know anymore. But the good news is that it's fallen. Now I'm going to show you. This first falling of Babylon took place around about this period, from 17 on. Well, in actual fact, from about the 1755. But there was the fall of Babylon, from 1798, but I want to jump back a little bit further. 1755, we started to get something happening with the power of darkness. It was being pushed aside. But remember, we've got two lights coming out of here. We've got the French Revolution. We've got technology and commerce and things flying and growing. But we also have, out of this time period, a reformation from the incorrect understandings of God, not just what I'm saying, not an incorrect understanding of the law, an incorrect understanding of who God is and what it's all about and who Jesus was, and we start getting a clearer picture of who God is. And so we have an incredible reformation. And so Babylon, which was in darkness for a great period of time, we actually have light. But then in Revelation chapter 18, we are introduced again, and it sounds almost like, when I read it, I'm thinking to myself, what just happened here now? Because, I mean, Revelation 14, that's 4 chapters before 18. I mean, it said it's fallen there, but now I read in Revelation chapter 18, verse 2, with a mighty voice. Wow, now listen to this. Verse 1 says to me, this angel comes down and he's a bright, beaming angel. He's not quiet in his, he's not like, Babylon is fallen. This angel, it says, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority and the earth was illuminated. That means that all of a sudden something that's happening is even more illuminating than technology. It's actually even more exciting than technology. And he comes down and it doesn't say, he says with a loud voice, a mighty voice, fallen is Babylon. But then all of a sudden the words change. He doesn't repeat what the first one said yet. But he says this, she has become a home for demons, a haunt for every evil spirit, a haunt for every unclean and detestable bird. For now we have the link to the first one. For all the nations have drunk from the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth have committed adultery with her. And the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. Wow, we have this. It's not just fallen is Babylon because he made all nations rich. Now we have this elaborate description of what Babylon actually done. And that's what we're going to talk about over the next while. What has actually happened? Since 1844, since this 1755 on, we've had a great reformation in technology, which is incredible. The earth has been illuminated with light. But we were in Babylon, in darkness. And it's not as far as technology is concerned. We are still in darkness with regards God.
But this is Babylon, isn't it?
This is Babylon. Now the interesting thing is that if you read Revelation chapter 8, verse 4, it says, and I heard another voice from heaven say, now it's God speaking from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, that you will not receive any of her plagues, for her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Now this statement here, that the sins have piled up to heaven and God has taken note of it. I want you to be aware of that phrase. Okay, so what we're going to discuss next week is that we're now also introduced to a repetition of the first message, but this time there's more elaborate information. And what is that about? What is really going on? And as I said to you right in the beginning, I have decided to devote one chapter entirely to actually revealing what also happened in the Reformation. Not just the good things that you see. Things crept out of there that, that challenged God. And yet we believe it.